I want to really start now from SUO Global, a series dedicated to the startups. And the startups that we want to really dedicate upon are not necessarily the ones which are founded by Indian promoters, but also to talk about at the larger level what startup ecosystems exist, where are the loopholes, where are the pitfalls, where exactly the founders can be know of things when they are actually struggling to create an startup success in their own ventures. In this series, I have invited my friends to dedicate specific sessions to specific issues like funding, then to also talk about incubation and many more, and more particularly even the taxation. Not only keeping the Indian paradigm, but also to be able to talk about the international startup ecosystem and scenarios. But now I have something to share because this is going to be the first session with regards to the startups that we are starting. So I want to dedicate the first session more importantly to talk about the macro level issues which concern and which possibly would be dealt by the startup promoters in India more particularly. I would want to also talk about the fact that how and in what manner at a macro level our startup ecosystem is different, not just to talk about the enabling system or the enabling provisions or the enabling legal system or administrative system, but also to talk about the overall possibilities of financing, how does it make a difference, and where is the change in the mindset required for us to be able to really make an impactful startup ecosystem in India. And being a lawyer, one of my major focus today in this session would also be to talk about the overall regulatory framework, which is somewhere or other impeding and somewhere or other putting brakes to the startup ecosystem to be able to realize its fullest potential. Let me start with the first few issues. If we go by the numbers, only 10% of the startups in India do survive after 5 years of their inception. If you go by this number, then there is a stark difference in terms of the numbers being in their 50s, in mid 50s in Europe, and almost on the similar lines in North America. And the most concerning part of all this is only 1.2% of the startups who start in India after the 5 years after their inception are able to give some returns to its stakeholders as well as employees, which means the profitable outcomes. So 80% of such acquisitions which happen in the startup ecosystem in the first 5 years is actually not acquisition by virtue of a profitable purchase of the value of the shares, which would enhance the financial outcomes for the promoters as well as the employees. That 82% of these acquisitions, unfortunately, are distress sales, which means the employees or the promoters don't get anything out of it. And having said so, only 1.2% acquisitions really result in something profitable for the promoters and the employees. Now, in this background, what is missing? Is it that Indian startup promoters or the ecosystem materially lacks in terms of the innovations, the technologies, or the people who could be really bringing in the technologies which would be path-breaking in the world at large? Maybe the answer would be mixed. Few answers that I may want to talk about. According to me, the first issue could be what is to be faulted is the mindset. In India, even if somebody may come with a very innovative startup, but which is an invention, there is a novelty and it's coming for the first time, the likelihood of the investments in that particular startup is next to, so to say, zero or almost very meager. Why is that so? The reason is very simple. In India, unfortunately, we don't regard or we don't give any relevance to the real novelty or innovations because there would be risk involved there. The chances of an entity or a business or a service which is very innovative, there is novelty, there is invention, something patentable, the chances of it making it big in India could be less, but then no investor wants to risk the money. So what happens is they don't get the funding and they strive and struggle only to after a while give up. So what are the kind of startups which so-called startups like Zomatos and delivery apps or something to do with aggregator models trying to harp on an existing business which is already flourishing and there is a whole lot of dependent economy in second tier, third tier or even the metros, but also the possibility of employing cheap labor when it comes to deliveries or managing the logistics. Why are these companies getting the prevalence? They get the funding and there's no novelty. one after another, you would see these aggregators, which are delivery based startups, they get the funding. And a lot of the funding that comes into these ecosystems is from out of the country. Now, the reason why this happens is that there is an assurance of the outcome. So most of the companies which undertake this kind of businesses harp on digitizing the existing business to ensure that there is already a market. You replace the existing markets with something to do with technology supplemented by cheap labor, and then ensure that you are able to immediately capture the market, not always leading to the profits, but certainly leading to the valuation. So when we look at this kind of a scenario, neither are the people who are working in this ecosystem winners in the long run. Secondly, even the promoters gain personally out of the valuation game and take an exit, but at the same time, it is not profitable again in the long run. And the third aspect is the people who are the end customers or consumers, they also are only taken for a ride when otherwise the people who have been serving to them for generations, they became unemployed, and there is a lot of disguised unemployment in the whole sectors. So these are the flip sides of the kind of startup ecosystems that we have. As I said, it is not in any manner encouraging the innovation to happen, and at the same time, it only reinvents the same wheel and makes the wheel run in a manner whereby there is a lot of disguised unemployment, there is overvaluation, and then very importantly, there is also a lot of data violations. But having said this is where there is a problem with regards to the ecosystem not supporting the innovations. So I'm not wanting to make a single comment that people aren't innovative, but if there is no incentive for being innovative, it will really deter the innovative people or people who are wanting to be engineers, innovative, undertake inventions, to possibly not do that for want of any incentive, or rather there being a lot of deterrence given the system that we are living in. Now I would want to talk about the overall regulatory framework from the government. Now, since I have just said that my colleagues would take care of the issues pertaining to the funding as well as also the incubation part and the incubators, I would want to stick around with few things that are more to do with the legal framework of India. So when it comes to legal framework of India, let's compare India with European Union and North America for that matter. In India, the number of regulatory frameworks and the compliances for a company to be able to start a business as a startup would be to the tune of around 28. And that's not the capping, it's an average number. And in European Union, it's 5 to 6. And that is the cap, which means if you want to start a business in very straightforward 5 to 6 steps, you are in the business. However, in India, it takes 28 steps, bureaucracies, administrative hurdles to be able to overcome for a person to be, or a business to be able to see the sun of the day. Second aspect, the cost of starting a business. Insofar as European Union is concerned, the cost of starting a business is just 1 to 2% of the per capita income in those countries. In India, that is to the tune of around 15%, which is staggeringly high as compared to European Union. So which means there is not only a lot of, so to say, initial hurdle in starting a business with just the procedural compliances and the cost which is incurred for starting a business, but also once you want to and intend to start a business, there is undue delays, lack of clarity, transparency and fairness in enabling you to be able to start and commence your business. Then I would want to really talk about the fact that there is unfortunate aspect of overvaluation of startups, which is not in a manner encouraged by the systems, and that also happens on the account of not only the reasons for funding, but because of a lot of methods which directly or indirectly interplay with the life of or the journey of a startup. The third aspect that I would want to talk about is the tax terrorism. Now that's an expression which is being very commonly used now for many reasons. Not that it's just the startups which suffer on account of the so-called tax terrorism, but it's particularly also the case wherein the startups, other than many other, so to say, business houses or corporations or businesses, have to face this on day-to-day basis. Let me start by saying that in India, which is one of the rarest, and to my understanding, the only country in the world wherein tax authorities are incentivized for labeling liabilities and making claims. So for tax, not just tax collection, but for even undertaking tax-related litigations, there are incentives. Most of the times, almost in the first 5 years, there are more than 62% of the startups who have to directly or indirectly face the consequences of tax authorities making wrongful claims. And very interestingly, most of those wrongful claims never get adjudicated, never get decided, even after 5 years of commencement of the business. Now, there is another aspect of this so-called policies, that almost on daily basis, when it comes to bureaucratic compliances, a startup in India would be required to take on an average around 6 compliances on daily basis. So taking the overall figure to a staggering 2100 compliances a year. So which almost makes it very imperative for the startups to dedicate at least 1 or 2 people only for managing the administrative affairs, compliances, understanding the policies, which is an extra cost on account of having the people to manage the the government related compliances, which can be done away with if there was a clarity, fairness and transparency in the policy framework of the country. So in this background, when we look at the whole scenario, we talk about the regulatory framework, we talk about not the ease but the hindrances, or how difficult it is for a startup ecosystem or the startups to be able to see the sun of the day after a few years of having commenced their business, and also seeing and talking about how the government machinery, administrative systems, and more particularly the tax authorities make it difficult for startups to be able to focus on their businesses. I want to also really talk about the fact that the Indian startup ecosystem really needs to awake itself and to rise to the consciousness that they are not going to make any impact internationally if all that they're doing is to try to tap on the Indian middle class or people who are now using the internet with the intent that they could replace the traditional businesses with by digitizing the same with the cheap labor, only with the hope that they would be able to have high valuation leading to good investments internationally and have a good exit. And very so to say, when we dissect this whole system, what we realize is it's just a few people and few VC funds and few startups which see that recycling and reusage and kind of trading happening among the startups, which is not really always the valuation, which is not the truly reflective of the worth of the startups, which we see to be becoming unicorns. And that's precisely why quite a few unicorns lost their luster after becoming unicorns, and they ceased to be unicorns. When there was otherwise no dearth of the market, there was no recession of a kind which could have taken away their sheen or their ability to grow further. And that's also a reason why most of the startups in India, in spite of seemingly being promising, are unable to make any impact or any, so to say, presence on an international scenario. The fact has been that we lack the ability to globalize our startups for want of innovation, for want of technical and deep tech advancements. We have been thriving on a system which is where innovation and real deep tech advancements have not been incentivized on account of the uncertainty involved therein, and the investors trying to only put in their money with the intent to seek overvaluation and an exit profitably, when the employees, the promoters and society doesn't necessarily achieve anything out of it. So that's a sorry state of things, but that does not mean that there is no future for startups. The global startup scene has improved over a period of time. The countries, continents, and more particularly very significant economies are now opening up to global startup promoters to lay the seed of their startup ideas in their respective countries, so that the individuals and the promoters and the countries could all benefit out of creating an ecosystem which could mentor and also enable specific sector startups to flourish in a form wherein, in a cluster wherein you have enabling law, you have adequate funding, you have good mentorship, availability of skilled human resource, and a huge market which is ready to take advantage of the globalization of that technology. So I look forward to having more of these sessions. I expect my colleagues to be able to bring out very enlightening and very path-breaking ideas and informations which would really be helping a lot of our friends in the startup ecosystem to tap and capitalize over the same. Thank you.